Indian economy. In Unit 4, we have to talk about poverty and unemployment. And you would recall that we have basically discussed the different types of poverty. We have talked about absolute and relative poverty in the last session. Now, the feedback that I have received from one of the students is that they are still not able to understand the difference between absolute poverty and relative poverty well. So what I have done is, I have taken up a hypothetical example to make you understand the difference more clearly. Now, in this particular example, let us consider that there are 5 individuals, A, B, C, D, E, right? And basically these have been arranged in the ascending order of their earnings per day. So A earns 13 rupees per day, B earns 17, C earns 19, D earns 20, and E earns 97 rupees per day, right? Now please understand, this is a hypothetical example, so it may not correspond to reality. What I am trying to do is I am trying to make you basically understand the difference between absolute and relative poverty. Now please understand, supposing if the poverty line has been fixed at rupees 15, that is 15 rupees per day per individual, then please understand which one of them will be below poverty line. A will be below poverty line because he is earning less than rupees 15, while B, C and D and E, they would be all above poverty line. Why? Because they are earning more than rupees 15 a particular day. Fine. Now, supposing if the poverty line is shifted upwards to rupees 25, now what will happen? All those who are earning less than rupees 25 a day, they would be considered below poverty line. All those who are earning more than 25 rupees a day would be considered to be above poverty line. And have a look at this particular column and you would find that A, B, C and D, all of them are earning less than rupees 25. D, who is earning the highest among them, is earning 20 rupees. So basically they would all be below poverty line, while E only would be above poverty line. Fine. Now please understand that as far as relative poverty is concerned, many a times we make use of quartile values or median values. If you recall, yesterday I talked about how the threshold is set at the median income in most countries. But what I have done here is, I have set the threshold at first quartile value. Here the threshold has been set at the median value, but here it has been set at the first quartile value. Now what is first quartile value? I hope you recall your discussion from statistics for business decision, and you would understand that the first quartile is nothing but the bottom 25% in terms of their rank. Fine. So if you look at these 5, who would comprise the bottom 25%? Right? Basically, the bottom 25% would be somewhere around 1.25, which means the lowest one and somewhere below the second lowest one, which means A or somewhere below B. In other words, the first quartile would be somewhere between 13 and 17, right? And since the first quartile is between 13 and 17, we can say that if we talk about relative poverty, those who are earning below 13 or 13, they would be BPL, while those who are earning 17 or more would be APL. Why? Because the first quartile is somewhere between 13 and 17. Let us say that it is 14.5. This is just a figure that I am giving you just to make you understand things. So it may not correspond to reality. Now please understand, supposing if the first quartile value is 14.5, so all those who are earning less than 14.5, which means here in this particular example A, would be part of BPL. All those who are earning more than 14.5, example B, C, D and E, they would be part of APL. Fine. Now let us fix the median value rupees 19 as the poverty line. Now what do we mean by the median value? The value which is exactly in the middle, 50% below and 50% would lie above the median value. So which one is the median value? 19. So all those who are earning less than 19, they would be BPLs. All those who are earning more than 19 would be APLs. Those who are earning exactly 19, they are exactly at the poverty line. Is that fine? So this is how we can calculate absolute poverty and relative poverty. Now please understand one thing. Depending on where your poverty line is, have a look at these two cases. Depending on where your poverty line is, the number of people who are below poverty line would shift. If you raise the poverty line, which happened in this particular case, so the poverty line was raised. If you do this, what will happen? Number of BPLs would increase. Fine. Likewise happened here also, when instead of the first quartile value as the poverty line, I took the median value as the poverty line. The first quartile value was 14, the median value was 19. You saw that there was an increase in number of below poverty lines. Earlier there was just one, but now in this case there were two of them who were below poverty line. Fine. So this is number one. And secondly, you also need to understand that just asking what the poverty is in a particular country or in a particular region, what are the figures for poverty, we have to ask what is the absolute poverty level and what is the relative poverty level. Why? Because the people who are below poverty line, BPLs, the people who are above poverty lines, the APLs, where the poverty line is, it all depends on which category of definition of poverty we are using. Are we going for absolute poverty or are we going for relative poverty? So depending on which particular kind of poverty estimate we are using, there would be difference in the number of people who are found to be below poverty line. Is that making sense to you? Right? In case you are not able to still understand, you can go through this video again, and you still have questions, you can ask the questions whenever we meet again for the offline classes. Fine? Now, just to remind you, relative poverty, the threshold was set at median income in most countries. So I've done that here. So all those who are earning less than this median value, they would consider themselves to be below poverty line. Now this is the relative poverty. Fine. For example, take this example of A. If in the same country the absolute poverty is rupees 15, yes, he would be BPL, be it absolute poverty or be it relative poverty. Fine. But if somebody is earning 17 rupees, he is, according to the definition of absolute poverty, he is above poverty level, but he still will be below poverty line as far as relative poverty is concerned. Why? Because in relative poverty, if you use median value as the poverty line, 50% of the population would be below poverty line. If you use the first quartile, 25% of the population would be below poverty line. If you use the third quartile, Q3, then 75% of the people would be below poverty line, right? Let me put it conversely. If you use first quartile value, 75% of the people would be above poverty line. If you use median, 50% of the people would be above poverty line. Have a look here. APL, there are two APLs, just like there are two PPLs. And if you use rupees 19 median value as poverty line, then you have seen that 50% of the people would be below and 50% of the people would be above poverty line. But if you use the third quartile, you would find that 75% would be below poverty line while only 25% would be above poverty line, right? Fine. Now also you need to understand that if you talk about, let's say, the example of C, or let's say talk about the example of B. Let's not take up this example, let's take up example of B. Now if you talk about this particular condition where he needs rupees 15 to arrange food, shelter, clothing and these kind of basic necessities, here he is above poverty line. But here, though he can arrange all these things, because he is earning more than 17, he is more than 15 rupees, he is earning 17. Here in this case we know that only rupees 15 would be sufficient for him to arrange his food, clothing and shelter. But if he is earning 17 rupees, so he is able to arrange all these things, but he is still below poverty line. What is the reason? Because he is among the bottom 50%. Fine. So he may be rich enough to arrange food, shelter and clothing for himself, but he is still, if you talk about relative poverty, he is still below poverty line. Is that okay? So this is another thing that you need to understand. Fine. Again, one more thing that you need to understand is, now have a look at D and E. Both of them are above poverty line if you talk about relative poverty, and if you talk about this particular poverty line, which is fixed at rupees 15. But who is how much above poverty line, this you cannot make out. So for your definition, he is also APL, he is also APL, but who is how much above poverty line, that is something that you cannot make out through this categorization of APL and BPL, right? Now let us talk a little bit more about the types of poverty that we have. Secondary poverty, the inability to fulfill basic needs owing to profligate expenditure on things other than necessities despite having sufficient income. Now here there is a case where a person has sufficient income and he can easily arrange the basic requirements for himself or his family. He can arrange food, clothing, shelter. He can also have access to good quality health and education. But still, he has this much money, but still he is not able to spend on these items. Why? Because he has been profligate enough. बहुत खर्चीला रहा है. And he has been profligate while he has been trying to satisfy other needs which are not very, very important. So for example, to buy a new car, supposing he has invested all his money, now he is not left with any money. So how would he be able to arrange food for his family or shelter for his family? He would not be able to do that. Or if somebody has bought a number of designer suits which people generally wear during in marriages. So if somebody has bought these kind of suits, now he does not have anything left with him so that he can spend on food or for medicine or for education for his family, then this is an example of a secondary poverty. He is not actually poor, but why has he not been able to arrange the basic necessities for his family or for himself? The reason is because that he has spent a lot of money on other things which are not important at all, like for example owning a car or buying a fridge or buying a TV, and this is just not good. Fine. In fact, it was found that many times when some poor families are provided some subsidy or provided some grants by the government, many a times it was found that the male head of the household used to spend all the money in buying liquor, sharab. And despite the government providing loans, there used to be nothing left to feed the family. And this was one reason why then the government decided when such subsidies are to be given, they would be credited in the account of the female heads of the household. So for example, there's a family which comprises of a father and a mother, 2 children and of course a grandfather. The government, if the government wants to give away some subsidy, that subsidy would be credited not to the account of the father or the boy or the grandfather, but to the account of the mother, the female head of the household, the senior most female in the household. The reason is, it has been found that females generally do not suffer from secondary poverty. Why? Because they do not spend money in those items which are not necessary, which are not basic to their survival. So if they get money, they would like to spend on the education of their children or maybe to feed them more nutritious food. Fine. And that is why this policy change has happened. Nowadays, most of the subsidy amount that comes from the government is credited to the account of the female head of the household. Now, there's another categorization that is generally talked about, rural versus urban poverty. So, poor people who live in rural areas comprise the rural poverty. Those who live in urban areas are considered to be urban poor. Fine. But we need to understand one more thing. You might have seen people who actually migrate from rural to urban areas, and that is why it is said that whether urban poverty is nothing but an extension of rural poverty. Now, what is the meaning of the sentence? People are moving from rural areas to urban areas, which we know as migration within the country. And most of these people move in search of some good job, a well-paying job. So a poor person who earlier used to live in a village, now he has migrated to a urban center, to a city, to a metropolitan city, and there he's trying to earn something. So now, since he has become part of the urban poor, but actually to start with he was basically a rural poor. So that is why it has been said that whether urban poverty is nothing but an extension of rural poverty. Fine. So with this, we come to the close of this lecture. In case you are not able to understand anything, you can always ask me. And now we are closing this particular lecture, and tomorrow we'll be talking about the poverty estimates, how poverty is estimated. Thank you very much for your time.